Hello and welcome everyone to the main event. My name is Nita Sani and I'm really pleased to be joined by our special guest today, Florence Weber Zuanigh. Hi Florence, how are you doing?
Hi, Rita. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm really good and we're having you back. This I think is our third webinar together, isn't it?
Yes, something like that, yeah. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And I have to say, actually, that this has been one of our most popular webinars. We've got nearly 100 people signed up and in the room today. And so it just goes to show that it's Neurodiversity Celebration Week, and it's something to celebrate. I love that it's being framed that way. Maybe it always was. I don't know. That you're the expert. You tell me. Is celebration a new word when looking at neurodiversity?
I think it's definitely one that we start to hear a lot more about. Um, and it's not one that unfortunately gets celebrated a lot in the workplace. For example, compared to things such as International Women's Day, Neurodiversity Celebration Week is one that that didn't get like a lot of press, at least this year. But it's great to see
Yeah,
that, yeah, as you said, people sign up and people are intrigued, people want to know more, people want to do better, and that's yeah, amazing to see.
I agree, and I think the using the word celebration actually reflects, the people in the workplace who can see the benefit of having colleagues and employees who have neurodiversity. For families, I have two neurodiverse children, and I always talk to them about it being a superpower, a bit like X-Men, where they haven't worked out how to hone it yet. I think that society is catching up with the talent that neurodiversity brings. Um, but actually, when I was looking at some of the statistics, organizations that who employ and encourage their neurodiverse workforce are nearly 30% more profitable, more effective, more impactful. That's huge. That's by Harvard Business School. I mean, that's black and white. Does that surprise you? What do you make of that stat?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. It's the same thing when you embrace people from all cultures, people from all backgrounds. This is obviously you get more people with a diverse way of thinking and experiencing the world in the room, where it's going to
Yeah.
mirror the diversity that you see in your clients and that you see in the world. So this is, yeah, it's definitely not a surprise there.
Good. Well, look, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the topic in more detail. So, welcome everyone. If you haven't joined us before, this is for you guys. For those that have, please forgive me for repeating, but it's really important just to identify that, look, 45 minutes is how long we want to do this session. We try to keep it succinct because we know time is precious. And we are also recording this session and it will come out to everybody afterwards. One thing I really encourage everyone to do is to not only take from it what you are going to get because you're here because it's important to you, but share it with your colleagues, share it with managers, share it with people in your world that may not see it and the benefit of celebration and engaging and encouraging neurodiversity. So spread the word and let's help everyone do better, the neurodiverse members of the team, their colleagues, the organization, everyone. I think there's just no downside to this session. So 45 minutes. Now we run these sessions as interactive. So I'm going to start by just showing everyone our chat box. It's really easy. I'm going to say hello to everyone. Hopefully you can see my comment in there. And if you are out there and you can hear us, just give us a hi, give us your name, let us know you're there. Just helps us to know that the tech is working, the all important tech. And then I just wanted to take us to the poll because, again, we want to make this session interactive, but also impactful for the people in the room to get their challenges and solutions in this session now. So we have a question for you. So we really want to understand what's working and where the challenges are. So question being, how does your organization encourage neurodiversity? The first one is, are you using inclusive recruitment policies and procedures? We're actually going to be talking about that. So 22% right now are saying that that's something you do. Raising awareness and education in the workplace, that's 33% of the room right now is saying that's part of their world. The highest result is support and adjustment, so that's good. We're engaging, we're understanding, and trying to make adjustments to support the neurodiverse workforce. And then the final one is other, and we've got 10% of the room are saying other. So let's have a look at what some of the responses are. We've got some hellos. Good afternoon, everyone. Deb, yes, you can only tick one box, but pop your comments in the box here if you can about what else you do. We'd love to hear from anyone. And if there's a challenge on the ground, please let us know as well. So without further ado, Flo, before we get into this, I'm just going to cover what our agenda is today. We always make this quite an interactive session, so it's not going to be regimented, but the areas that Flo and I aim to cover today is, first and foremost, how to build an inclusive workplace culture. So not just ticking a box, but bringing it to life. Secondly, strategic solutions to reducing any workplace discrimination that might be there. There are so many preconceptions that, unconscious bias is there, right? Somebody doesn't give you eye contact, we automatically think they're not interested, but actually for neurodiverse people, that can be a challenge. How the impact of neurodiversity can be in terms of team dynamics. And then finally, we're going to cover some practical tips on implementing neurodiversity initiatives. So, Flo, that's quite a lot to get through.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe we should start by reminding everyone about neurodiversity versus neurodivergence and neurotypical. So, as a person,
That would be great.
that has a neurodivergent condition or symptoms or diagnosis, however they want to phrase it, they would be neurodivergent. Someone who's neurotypical is someone that doesn't have, or at least doesn't know they have, any kind of neurodivergent condition. And neurodiversity as a whole is any group of people where you have both neurotypical and neurodivergent people. So really that celebration of neurodiversity in the workplace is about celebrating all the different ways that your people are thinking and expressing themselves. I think one of the best ways that I've heard people talking about what it's like to be neurodivergent, it's the difference between if your OS is a Windows or a Mac. There's not a right or a wrong way. It's just that it's just different. So you can still do the same things. You might just have to do them differently or go at it in a different way. And some are going to be better at some things than others, etc. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that, because it's the awareness, and there are such simple and very, very low cost solutions to the Microsoft versus Mac approach that everyone can make an impact and support the members of the team. And you just mentioned that there will be people that are not diagnosed but may have neurodivergent tendencies. So actually this is for everyone. This is a really inclusive session and a really inclusive topic, because for all of those that aren't diagnosed, they will just think, oh, that's just the way I am. But actually, and that's okay. Some have the titles and the understanding, some don't. But Flo, look, a lot of people say that, oh God, 20 years ago, we didn't have all of this. What do we say to somebody with that approach?
Pluto was discovered in 1930, but Pluto was there before 1930. So it's really the rise in research and awareness and all of those things that make it possible. For example, women and girls were excluded from research on ADHD until the 80s or 70s. There was no possibility to be diagnosed both autistic and ADHD until 15 or so years ago. So there is a lot that's changing in the research, in the definition of the conditions, and also the support available. So very often now, what you're going to have parents who get their child diagnosed and then realize that there is sometimes like a hereditary component. And then they're going to start looking at their parents and go, oh, wait, actually,
Yeah.
that's, the rise of
Which one of
diagnosis
us is it?
is a good thing. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. As I mentioned, I've been through that journey with my own children. And apart from this topic being important to me from my role as a business support and an organizational leader, I have that personal interest as well, because my children have gone from a school age to where my son will be out of university in a year, and will have to advocate for himself in finding a role in workplace, in an environment. And it's not straightforward, is it? Like, what are you finding is a theme out there in the world at the moment? This is National Neurodiversity Celebration Week. It's not national, it's international, actually. But how are you finding that employers are actually responding and engaging in this?
I think there is really something around what's available versus what's kind of advertised and really shared. So a lot of organizations are going to be like, oh, of course we are, like we don't have any issue with anyone having any kind of neurodivergence, but it's not kind of really said or advertised or mentioned at any point. And it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, your inclusion policies are only as good as you share them. So if no one knows, or if someone has to ask HR or ask someone to get an understanding, then it means that you're not
Yeah.
advocating for them enough. Or if you don't have overall practices that are meant to be inclusive and that all teams are supposed to use on a day-to-day basis, then again, it means that you're not quite there yet.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? This isn't about it being a case of when, we're not prejudiced against because we're open to it. That's not enough. This is about engaging. And I was just looking in my notes for a statistic I saw about actually mentioning neurodiversity in adverts, job adverts. In 2018, neurodiversity related keywords were only 1%, and now they're 3.8%. I mean, that's a 400% increase. That's huge. That is a direct impact of an awareness and also an understanding that there are advantages to hiring people with neurodiverse diagnoses.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same as any kind of difference in gender, background, or anything at all. Like if you only have people that are from the same mold around the room, you only get the same kind of solutions. And it's just really fantastic when you have like truly diverse teams and truly diverse people with you, that you can kind of see what you can come up with, because obviously it goes a lot further than it would if you only have the same cookie cutter version of an employee or colleague.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of questions in the chat box, which I'm going to get to before we dig into our agenda. But again, one final statistic before we get into it is that when employees are supported and are developed specifically to the neurodivergent way, retention rises to 90%, so that you get some huge loyalty and engagement back. So it's just such a win-win. Right, Flo, couple of questions from the chat box, and thank you everyone for giving us your questions in there. So Irene asks about the best way to get a diagnosis. Now, that could be a really big question. Is there a short version answer you can give for that, Irene? Flo, sorry.
Yeah, I can give like an average blanket answer to that. So I'm assuming that you mean diagnosis from the moment that you or someone around you would suspect something. And first port of call is always to try to like reach out to like any kind of organization. So for example, if we're talking about people that were diagnosed when they were children, this is something around, for example, dyslexia and dyscalculia that tends to start being diagnosed around the end of primary school. Because, like mixing up letters and numbers, this is something that kids can still do up to a certain age. So this is the kind of condition that would often have been diagnosed earlier on. Some other things such as ADHD and autism, where there can be like a very high form of masking meaning that people try to replicate the way they're expected to be. And therefore, you might one day hear that someone has ASD or ADHD and be like, oh, you? But actually, it's because there's a lot of things that they've been keeping in. And there's been like so many women and girls who have been misdiagnosed with an anxiety disorder where really they were masking something else. So getting a diagnosis, as we know, on the NHS can be very difficult, but usually locally, you have great organizations and charity that you can reach out to, and that can help provide the support while you seek a diagnosis, while you figure it out, because it can be like a very long path.
Yeah. Thank you, Flo. And one thing I will say, Irene, is that both Flo and I are available, and actually for anyone in the room, absolutely we'll answer questions and anything you have. We're available outside of these sessions as well. We're on LinkedIn. You'll get our email addresses and our mobile numbers and contact details in the follow-up email as well. So please don't think that our support stops at 1:45. We're very much here to support you. We also have a question from Inga, actually. What are the legal requirements for employers in regards to neurodiversity?
So legal requirements around that are a lot around the Equality Act 2010, which is around making sure that you can provide what are called reasonable adjustments. So this is a very fluffy legal term in that specific case. You can have a look also at what your competitors are doing. So for example, a lot of people now, when they post out a job offer, are going to have that little thing at the bottom saying, let us know the kind of adjustment, or this is how you can check how we hire. But I guess this is really the thing that we need to flip on its head with regard to the legal bit, is like, as an organization, do you really want to do just the legal bit? Because it tends to be the bare minimum. And this is something that can be like of real value, not just for your neurodivergent employees, but for all of your employees, really, like to know that, I know that when I get there, this is what's available for me. I don't have to like ask for it, share diagnosis with HR or anything. Like anyone can have access to those things that can help them thrive, feel like they belong, and perform at their best.
So what you're saying is the legal requirement is within the Equalities Act of 2010. However, make it your standard, because actually everyone can benefit from access to the reasonable adjustments, an environment of support, engagement, mentoring, coaching, whatever encourages employees to feel that they can be open and then know that they're supported throughout their journey.
Yeah, exactly. And there's loads of times as well where people don't really know what reasonable adjustment they need, because like a lot of people that are diagnosed a bit later or that are not aware of like the latest tech available might not really know what to ask for. And very often HR departments are under-equipped. And when you come to them like, oh, what do you need? But if you don't have a list of, here are things that we can do, sometimes people are like,
So make that list and make that list available on the intranet, or make it part of your induction process. And I tell you what, as much as we're still navigating the AI world, there's charities that will support in that. And there's also ChatGPT, which can give you a really comprehensive list. I've tested it a few times, and it's pretty close to perfect in terms of giving you, what would I call it, a framework of your thinking on paper in front of you. So it helps you, just to clarify, you've thought of everything. So not that I want us to do ourselves out of any support, but there's a lot of information out there. Actually, Flo, this leads us to creating an inclusive workplace culture if we start by having the right recruitment process, and in the induction we talk about, not just the legal minimum, but actually the engaging and being more than a tick box exercise. Is that the basis? How do we build an inclusive workplace culture? Where do we start?
Yeah, so where to start is a great point. It's going to depend a lot on the size of the organization, the resources that you do have. So yeah, as you said, very often people start with recruitment process and policies and induction, which is great.
Yeah.
But sometimes you've got people that have been in your company for 10, 20 years who might not have gone through that in the early stages. So having like some recurring events that really help people to just keep aware with all of that, or reviewing regularly how things are done across teams and making sure there is that options for people to learn from each other how to be more inclusive. Because yeah, since 2020, obviously we've seen a lot of organizations give those big lofty goals about what they wanted neurodiversity and diversity in general to look like. But it's really about how there's kind of no end line to that. Like if one day your organization is like fully diverse, including at board level, you're not going to go tomorrow, job done, we don't need to do anything anymore.
Yeah.
It's really about embracing the kind of ongoing journey and making sure that there is steps all along the way.
Yeah. And if you mentioned about it being the size of an organization, as a rule of thumb, could it be that a smaller organization with less moving parts might look at it every year, whereas a larger organization with many teams and many moving parts might look at it every quarter? I mean, what would be a sensible range be? And I'm asking a really obvious question, but I think sometimes that's what we come to this room for, is practical advice. There's no right or wrong. It's just what would be a good starting point, Yeah,
absolutely. And I don't think it's an obvious question at all, because all organizations are doing it differently, even if they are of a similar size. So a great thing is just to make sure that it's something that's always kind of in motion. So if you were to do something once a year, maybe you can afford to do something big once a year, like, like a big workshop or like a big panel talk or something, but you need to make sure that there is something ongoing constantly. So it can be as simple as when you do town hall meetings or at the end of meetings, have an opportunity for people to share what they've learned the past weeks or the past 2 weeks about an experience different to their own. Like, I've watched that documentary, listened to that podcast, or I came across this, or, it's really about it becoming like a habit and making sure that no matter when you have the budget to do something big, that it's still, part of that, your DNA and that's motion, really.
Okay. And so if we're starting at the beginning of building this inclusive workplace culture, I've just checked the poll, and inclusive recruitment policies and practices is the lowest scoring, which means that it may not be what organizations do the most. And obviously for us being, our journey starts with attracting the right talent into our client world. Does that surprise you, Flo? I think it surprises me, actually.
Yeah, me too. Very often this is what people have in place, and the awareness and the education take a bit of a backseat. But then I guess it depends also what you call awareness, because when you're the one organizing those events, those momentums, those policies, you might feel like, oh my God, we're doing so much awareness around it. But your colleagues have their own day-to-day job. And maybe they didn't see that email. Maybe they couldn't join that town hall because they had like a client meeting. So it's really about that awareness, always being like, are people as aware as we think they are? And just kind of question that and not hesitate to like really repeat yourselves.
Yeah, I just wanted to cover, because inclusive recruitment policies are the lowest scoring, plus because That's where it starts. That's the first place that a potential employee gets an understanding of your organization and what your culture is and what you stand for. I just wanted to cover a little bit about how recruitment processes can be adjusted. Things like job descriptions, you know, removing strong communication skills as a requirement if you really don't need it, you know, because you would be putting off people with neurodiversity that have so many other skills that they just take themselves off for. So really think about what's important for that role. And also this traditional Q&A format of interview, a lot of organizations, Flo, I've been hearing, and I'm sure, you know, this is what you train out to the world, is it doesn't have to be a face-to-face eye contact Q&A approach. It could be assessments, it could be pre-interview, it could be a project. There's so many different ways, aren't there, of reviewing a person's suitability, especially if they have a neurodiverse diagnoses.
Yes, absolutely. And even if the way you do it is Q&A, the standard Q&A, you can still send questions ahead of time or mention the kind of questions that you think of asking or what's the structure for the interview. There is, yes, so much adjustment, like small adjustments that can be done to those practices to make them more inclusive.
Yeah, and it again, it's just being thoughtful in and actually ask people like what how could we help them have a more successful interview process? What are their wins and challenges? JP Morgan Chase did an autism at work program where they replaced standard interviews with practical assessments, and they increased their hiring rate by 40%. 40%. Just imagine the cost to benefit of that. I mean, it's just powerful. Whatever size you are, it's going to make a difference. So ask the questions, I think, is what I would say, and make those small changes. Could be a quiet room, couldn't it? Like you said, send questions before, do more practical tests, give people a quiet room in which to like maybe have the interview, not too much distraction, but have the conversation, see how you can help them.
Yeah, and similarly to what JP Morgan did, really kind of just doing it like that. So a lot of organizations ask and say, oh, tell us if you need adjustments. But in the context of you're trying to look your best for a role, and some people might have had very discriminatory experiences in the past, this is a big thing for people to come up to potential employers and be like, oh, by the way, I need those adjustments in place. So just making sure that you offer them as standard is already going to make all of it more inclusive.
And I think that having the different types of, well, we know there are different stages for interviews anyway, but I think creating a standard that, that supports neurodiversity, I think is going to just help the process be more robust, more effective, and a 40% higher rate of hiring, I think is, that this a win-win again, Kate in the group has actually asked, what is the best way to make the correct adjustment to those interviewing for a role, as individuals have different needs? And again, it comes back to that people don't know what they don't know, right? So would we offer a list? These are some of the ways. Like, what would your suggestion be in that, Flo?
Having some kind of base that you offer as standard, with then people having the option to ask if they need anything else. So if you are someone who's neurodivergent and you see that the employer is already being forthcoming, they're already being like, oh, don't worry, we've got those things as bases, then it's going to be a lot easier to be like, actually, I need that extra thing. Is it possible? Because you know that they're really committed. It's not just a line that they copy and paste in all of their job posting.
Yeah. And what I would say is to anyone in the room, if you want further information on this, just put a little yes, please, in the chat box, and then Flo and I will look back, get your names, and we'll send something out to you that will start to give you a little outline framework to work from. Okay, we've talked about recruitment. Before we go into looking at the discrimination side of it, is there anything else you think – in terms of workplace culture that employers need to be aware of, Flo?
Probably something around looking at promotions, because obviously, similarly to what you said earlier about having strong communication skills, sometimes it might be seen as a bit of a barrier, and it can be seen as easier to like promote the extroverts um, within the employee group rather than, give everybody like an even chance to get there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
usually the easiest is, look at the recruitment practices first, and then look at how you're promoting and what are the kind of process and values and things that you look at when it comes to that.
Yeah, and also I think working to people's strengths, and that's whether they're neurodivergent or not, right? That is really engaging, understanding the wins and challenges, and then helping. I think that's something I've definitely learned in my time as a leader and a manager, is rather than wanting my employees to do every part of their job description the same way, I actually start now looking at where are their strengths in that, within that. What, how can we work to their strengths and maybe give some more support in the areas that are more challenging? And so that would cover your neurotypical and neurodivergent workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe you're going to have an employee that has like a special interest or a special passion, and you're like, actually, we don't have someone, we would need to learn more about that as a team. Maybe that person can help. So, yeah,
Yeah,
the open communication and staying curious is, definitely what can help with that.
yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we've looked about how to encourage the culture, but what about the discriminatory side of it? The fact that we're not there yet, that there's a lot of unconscious bias there. How can we? Well, first of all, what kind of discrimination would you define exists out in the workforce?
I guess in the workforce, some of the things that might be the less noticeable maybe would be like microaggressions, which is, it's obviously, for those who don't know, it's any kind of little sentences or little reaction that you can get from clients or coworkers that ultimately go back to kind of your identity. So, for example, if you're in a woman in the workplace, especially in a male dominated workplace, a microaggression would be, but who's picking up the kids today? That would be a
Mm,
microaggression. And when you have like, um, when you have dyslexia, dyscalculia, ASD, ADHD, etc. Again, this is not necessarily something that you scream in your workplace. Not everybody necessarily knows it, but then you might hear things such as, didn't you take your notes properly from that meeting? Oh, but
mm,
you've made so many typos in that email. So this is the kind of things that you need to make sure everybody understands, like everyone in the workplace has a basic understanding, so they can always lead from a place of curiosity and be solution driven rather than, be more snappy and make people feel worse.
yeah. And are you saying that it's the individual's own responsibility to educate their colleagues then, to help their colleagues understand?
Um, Not at all, actually. Some organizations do it really well, where they're going to say, oh, we want to host a panel, or we want to do a talk around that specific topic. Do we have anyone internally that feels comfortable sharing their own experience? In which case, this is amazing, because like you get that person is willing to do it, and they're open to sharing and to have questions asked about their own experiences. But this is not because they are like the one person is autistic in your workforce that they become the token autistic person that has to answer all of your questions around the topic. So
Yeah,
this is about the workplace to do that kind of basis awareness. And then if they can
yeah.
bring it more to life with those actual stories from the workplace and their people, it's amazing. But it has to be on a, yes, I'm fine to do that.
Yeah, so it's at an organizational level, it's voluntary, and it's about raising. It's education, it's understanding, awareness, and therefore just being a bit more considerate, right? Being a bit more not making assumptions, and rather than saying, oh, you're always making mistakes, oh, you're always interrupting, actually saying, hey, how can I help you with that? How can we work together on that? How are you doing with that? Anything I can support with? It's a reframe, which is the right way to be in a working environment anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I was once in a meeting where there was one Black woman in that meeting of 40, 50 people. And she was saying, this is really weird. In that organization, it doesn't feel as inclusive as previous organizations I've been at, which was already very brave of her to come out openly to say that. And the lead of the organization in that particular situation was like, oh, and can you tell me how did they do in your previous organizations? But asking more of her labor after she already came out with that. This is your job to look around. This is your job to, as you said, ask ChatGPT if you're not sure. This is your job to just make sure that people can feel that sense of inclusion and belonging.
Yeah. And so if organizations do it well, if they train on neurodiversity, what's the impact? What's the upside to an organization? May seem obvious, but let's talk about it.
Well, first and foremost, there is that level of trust between an organization and their employees, and the other way around, between an employee and the organization. So trust usually leads to more transparency, which is going to help out finding the best ways to work together as teams, work with the clients, and really it means that you can get the best out of your people. I mean, if you think about your relationships at work or otherwise, but the people you trust and that you're transparent with are the ones that you can have the most amazing experiences with, your best of friends, the most amazing holidays, the most amazing everything, because there is that trust and that transparency.
Yeah, and authenticity, I think, as well. I think that when people are guarded or people don't, so from a neurodiversity side, they could be slightly guarded if they don't feel there's an environment of inclusivity. But from the neurotypical side or the management side, there could almost be a fear of, oh, I don't know what to say, I don't know how to say it. And before you know it, through no negative intention, there's a lack of connection and authenticity in that relationship. So it's so important what we're talking about today. And I think what you've said, Flo, and I remember this from our last webinar, my takeaway was be curious. Just that phrase, be curious, create an environment, and things will flow from that. It actually has its snowball effect, right? It takes up its own momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we talked about earlier, maybe you have some employees that don't have a diagnosis or that have no ID. So maybe you're going to pick up on something and be like, ooh, that person maybe has that particular condition. And you can already do the adjustment to work better together without having to put that person in an uncomfortable position by asking the question outright. So you can just, lead by curiosity.
Lead by curiosity. I love that. Now we're into the last few minutes. Well, we've got about 7 minutes, but we've still got a few areas to cover on the impact, but also real practical tips about implementing neurodiversity. But we've got lots of yes pleases, so that's fantastic. We will come back to you all with some outlines to support you. I did want to say, if you have any questions that you don't feel we've answered so far, please pop them into the chat box. Florence and I will try to make sure we cover those within the next 5 to 6 minutes. And if we don't, we'll do either a follow-up recording or we'll reach out to you and we'll make sure we get those questions answered. So, Flo, I just wanted to cover some of the stats that I was looking at about the impact of neurodiversity training, because it's just so amazing. I think I've already mentioned the 30% improvement in productivity. It actually... JP Morgan had the 40% increase in hiring, but also talked about for their Autism at Work initiative, talked about a 90 to 140% more productivity. Deloitte spoke about their inclusive teams being more dynamic, better morale, but are 6 times more likely to be innovative and problem solving. I mean, it just gets better and better. 28% higher revenue, doubling the net income. That came from Accenture. And Ernst & Young said that neurodiverse teams were more efficient at tasks that had specific pattern recognition in them. So actually, this higher percentage of roles that are advertised by asking for neurodiversity, by these sort of statistics that says actually match the skills and the needs of the role to the person. And if that requires a neurodivergent profile, don't be afraid to ask for it. Is that fair, Flo? Is that discrimination in that? Is that a positive affirmation? Like, how does that? Because that will be a question from someone somewhere, you know.
So this is, I mean, it's a great point. And if anyone has a question that they feel they can't ask, please do it now. This is a safe space, and Mita and I are both committed to give you the answers. So let's go. So the thing that can be problematic is, for example, if we take the example of autism, if you don't have first person or close personal experience with autism, some of your perception of what it means to be autistic are going to be shaped by what you see in the media. So some people are going to assume that because you're autistic, you're going to be like Rain Man or this kind of character, and you're going to be amazing at math, at graphics, or anything like that. But it's not always the case. I have a friend who's autistic, and this is clearly not her strength. This is just, we talk about it all the time and share like all little snippets of what's the neurodiversity life versus what people portray in the media. So it's really about making sure that this is what people want. So again, if this is something like that where you need a specific set of skill for a specific role, just asking for it and see what's coming back from like a voluntary response. It's about trying not to pigeonhole someone into what's their perceived strengths, and giving them the option, because maybe this is indeed their strengths, but just not what they actually enjoy doing or not where they want to evolve. So this is again about just putting it out there. We need someone who's good at this, and then kind of see what comes back.
And where these adverts are specifically saying we would welcome people with an AD with a neurodiversity diagnosis, is that enough? Like, is that what you would see as you've spoken about just being very open and encouraging people with the right skill sets to apply, but with these organizations that are being specific, that's enough, isn't it? Just to say, if you have a neurodivergence, please apply. Is that the best way? What would you say?
Yeah, so very often you have those kind of copy and paste little paragraphs that often are at the end of the ad. So this is something that you can say at the beginning when you're talking about your organization's culture, as opposed to specifically how you do the hiring. And you can say, we have we're a neurodiverse group of employee. We've got people from different backgrounds. Like, this is genuinely something that we welcome, and that we want to celebrate the diversity within our organization. This is not something for you to hide or to like not disclose.
Yeah. Okay. So it's having it's a catch-all as opposed to specific. That's your suggestion.
Yeah, exactly. And really saying that this is what you're striving for, so people feel comfortable sharing things, even in those early stages of getting to know your organization.
Yeah, fantastic. So Flo, I don't know how I've managed the timing, but we now have a minute to talk about practical tips on implementing neurodiversity initiatives. I think we've covered quite a few in the session anyway, but is there anything that you feel that we haven't covered that's important for everyone in the room to know today?
I think we mentioned it in our last webinar, so maybe it's again, as we said, make sure that you say it twice. Anything around just being honest with people about where things are at. So if now you're having a look at neurodiversity in your workplace, you can you can share that. Be like, we know we are not where we want to be, and we start now to look at it. If you've got suggestions, let us know, but this is where we're at. I think a lot of organizations feel uncomfortable about sharing their small progress or lack thereof. And
Yeah.
it's really like shooting yourself in the foot, because any work around diversity and inclusion is uncomfortable and is going to be uncomfortable. But if people really know you're willing to sit with that discomfort because you want to do better, it's really unlocking something entirely different there.
Yeah. That's actually given me kind of aches in my belly and goosebumps, because you're so right. Like employers, managers, they're almost thinking, oh, I don't feel like I can do this because I should have done it ages ago. Best time was back then. Next best time is now. Don't look back. Let's make today the day that we want to start working towards improvement, and let's all get on that journey together. And I think actually from an employee cohort perspective, they will really respond to you as an employer, just taking the time to have a conversation, ask some questions, get an understanding, and then starting to make small incremental changes. It doesn't even need to be huge, does it? I mean, what would you say for an employer? Creating the space is the first thing, the conversation. What would you say an employer could do that could be like minimal cost, minimal time, but impactful flow? Like, you must have had questions from your clients saying, we want to do something, but what can we do that's quick and easy to do that will have some impact?
Yeah, it really doesn't have to be complicated. Even something as like an anonymous survey where you just say,
Yeah.
we are trying to do better, and maybe you can ask also, which areas do you think we should prioritize first? I mean, but the key is really to make sure that it's truly anonymous, not those things where, which team are you part of? What's your age? But really, really properly
Yeah.
anonymous, because
Yeah.
this is where you're going to get the actual answers that you're seeking. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Flo, thank you so much for your insights, your time that you give us. It's such an important topic, and I know that you are so dedicated to making the working environment a better place for people with neurodiversity and everyone who in teams working together. We are out of time today, folks. I've actually run over a little bit, so apologies for that. But thank you to you all who've signed up and attended today. It's been an interactive group. We have promised to get back to everyone with the yes pleases, just to give you a little bit of an outline. And on that note, I think I'm going to say bye for now. I'm going to actually do the poll just so everyone can see what everyone else is doing and get some insights on that. But Flo, thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Hopefully we'll do it again soon. I'm going to say bye for now. Bye, everyone.